Welcome, Dr. Ackerman.
Thank you. So it's a pleasure to be standing here in front of everybody. Today I want to talk about a problem that I've been aware of for some time and which has sort of motivated my whole career, and I'm just now realizing that I need to be telling people about the problem as well as what I've been working on developing to help people with it. So fundamentally, the problem that we face right now in developing innovation in healthcare is that physicians, as a general rule, are not ready to innovate, and the engineers and scientists and computer scientists and all those folks that we need to help drive innovation in healthcare are not prepared to innovate within the healthcare space. So this was me back in 1995, except not the guy in the white coat, the one with the pants down, except I was a junior in engineering at Washington University in St. Louis, and I found myself sitting in my doctor's office staring at this picture. Okay, for those that don't know, this is a picture by Norman Rockwell that was on the cover of the Saturday Evening Post in 1958. And it occurred to me while I was sitting there, coming from my dorm room where I had all sorts of new gizmos and gadgets and cool technology that I was learning how to build, sitting there in my doctor's office, basically the scene hadn't changed since 1958. And it occurred to me that there was something wrong with this picture, that there had been no evolution in approximately 40 years, or at least nothing that you could outwardly see. And that's when I turned around and said, you know what, I'm going to finish my engineering degree, but I want to be able to have an impact in this space. I want to get the new innovations there. And at the time, the way that I saw for me personally to do that was to go to medical school. So I've been to medical school, I did a PhD in biomedical engineering, and this is the direction that has worked very well for me personally, but it's not really a workable way to get the large number of people that we need in the innovation space in healthcare ready to innovate. There's a big challenge here because people who do innovation have a peculiar way of thinking about what it takes to do an innovation, to make money off of it, which is a big driver to what we do. And so classically, when you go to places where people are learning about how to innovate, how to do startups, how to drive new technologies, this is the Venn diagram that you see. What's desirable to my users? What's possible with the technology? And what's viable in the marketplace? We as clinicians may have a good idea about what's desirable to users, but we frequently don't really know what's possible with the technology, and we almost definitely don't know what's possible and viable within the marketplace, which means that we end up with ideas that are somewhere up over here, which is not where you get to innovations that go anywhere. Okay, you need to be in the center. The problem for the engineers is that within healthcare, in order to get to a product that's workable, there's a whole different Venn diagram of understanding what the actual problems are. You have a vast array of different people, doctors, nurses, techs of various kinds, patients, who all have to be able to work with whatever your innovation device or idea is. You have very different physical environments that these things have to be used in. You have a set of devices and other tools that are already in place, and then you have these horrific and very large healthcare systems that you somehow have to integrate your idea into. As clinicians, we sometimes understand that, although frequently we see the patient in front of us very, very well and often lose sight of everything else that you need to understand to be able to innovate well. So there is a known solution about how to bridge this gap, and lots of other industries do this fairly well. And within the healthcare domains, lots of people make efforts. The key is that you have to take the people who you want to have do your innovation and you have to get them into the clinical environments. They have to be able to shadow, watch what the doctors, nurses, patients are doing, and generate that larger understanding. So how do most people do it? What they tend to do is they tend to say, well, I need a doctor who's interested in solving a problem, and they take an engineer or a group of engineer or trainee, and they have a fairly brief, small group or one-to-one mentoring process. And what happens is the clinicians say, on Wednesday, you can come in when I'm doing some procedures you'd be interested in. or I'll meet with you an hour next week and the week after. And it's simply not enough time, and it's not a broad enough view of what's going on. The other problem is when you do that, the clinicians tend to drive the understanding of the problem. And as I said, for big problems, the clinicians are very good at telling you about the patient in front of you, but often lose sight of the larger picture of the problems and lack the understanding of how all this integrates with a system. And then the clinician's time tends to be highly constrained due to cost. There's also a huge problem of not really easily generating enough clinicians or clinical sites. There are lots of rules and regulations. And you'll notice I say HIPAA and OSHA, those are real barriers to bringing non-clinicians into clinical settings, but there are an awful lot of things that are merely matters of perception. Oh, I am not allowed to have a student here. Is there a rule? Is there a law? Often there's not. It's usually just the clinicians, the administrators that you need to convince to do it don't believe that things like this is possible. The students often are forced in who they get to shadow and are often told what's important, which does not get to having a good understanding of what the problems. And finally, there's always this question, is doing something like this allowed? I take a very different approach. I teach a course with Georgia Tech where I've had from 20 to 60 students at a time, where we bring them in for lectures where we teach them how to behave in a clinical setting, and then we simply put them in a clinical setting. It's our active emergency departments. They wear uniforms, these nice light blue lab coats, where they run around and they watch whoever they can. They find doctors and nurses who are interested and exciting about telling them the problems they're facing. They have the opportunity to talk to patients, and then they come back to the classroom and work with me and sometimes others of my colleagues and get a broader understanding of the problems that they've identified firsthand. Over the course of the semester, they identify 4 problems. The big question is, how do we do more of this? I'm one guy with one site. We've done this in 3 different healthcare systems now, but it's challenging. When you work with a single clinician, you can ask that clinician to volunteer a little bit of time. When you teach a class semester after semester, it's a big amount of time. In the long run, it's probably much less expensive than trying to recruit new clinicians time and time again. And what we really need to do is identify other places, other clinicians who are excited about teaching our future innovators how to innovate and have them create a similar program in other settings. Lots of folks have supported my work. Much of my time has been paid for with endowments from the Wallace H. Coulter Foundation that's been very motivated to help develop our medical healthcare innovators of the future. And I'm happy to leave about 30 seconds for a question or two. So I love that question. And in fact, this evening I'm catching a flight out to California for the Society of Academic Emergency Medicine. We're doing a one-day pre-conference workshop about how to do innovation. There are a couple of medical schools that have models where they'll have medical students work with engineering students. It's a good start. The challenge is those medical students don't know the clinical world well enough to actually guide the engineering students through. The engineering students, I think, are providing much more of a service for the medical students than the other way around. But there's definitely a need to get more clinicians to think about this, to understand that their ideas are important, can change practice. The other challenge in working with clinicians is we're trained to believe that we're right most of the time. And there's a tendency when we work with other people to push things the direction that we understand rather than listening to what might be better solutions. Thanks.